Welcome to part 4 of 5 for the series on the Active Directory Project 2.0. If you haven't seen the previous parts where we go over how to build out a diagram for this project, install our virtual machines, and configure Active Directory, I will highly recommend that you go and watch that first. Today, our objective is to install and configure Splunk onto our Ubuntu server along with configuring our Windows endpoints to send telemetry over to our Splunk server. Afterwards, we will create an alert that will detect successful authentications. As a reminder, I am in the middle of creating another 30-day SOC Analyst challenge, and if you're interested, you can sign up for the waitlist by heading over to mydfir.com/challenge or click on the link down below. Let's get started. To get started with this, let's head over to our MyDFIR-Splunk virtual machine. And what I'll do here is open up a PowerShell window, and let's SSH into our virtual machine. For the password, I'm just going to simply copy that and let's paste that in here. The first thing I want to do here is make sure that I update and upgrade all of the repositories on this machine. So I'll type in apt-get update and apt-get upgrade-y. While that is updating, let's go ahead and download Splunk. So on my browser, I am simply going to search up Splunk. Let's click on the first one there. And then sign up for an account if you haven't done so already. Once you have signed into Splunk, head over to Products and go to Free Trials and Downloads. From there, you want to click on Get My Free Trial under the Splunk Enterprise. Because we are using Ubuntu 22.04, I am going to select Linux, and I am going to select the .deb file and click on Copy wget link. Go ahead and copy that. Heading back over to my SSH session, I'm just going to hit enter and hit enter one more time. Now that we're good to go, clear out the screen and I will right click and hit enter. Now that we finished downloading Splunk, I am going to type in ls just to make sure that we see it, and we do right here. To install Splunk, I'll type in dpkg-i and point it over to my Splunk file. So I'll just type in Splunk and hit tab for auto completion and enter. After a couple minutes, you should see the complete message on your screen. And now we need to head over to the Splunk directory, which is under /opt/Splunk. Type in ls, and we do have a couple files and directories here. The directory that we need to head into is the bin directory. So I'll type in cd bin. Type in ls one more time, and here we can find our binaries and Python scripts. The one that we're most interested in is the Splunk. So this one right here. Let me go ahead and clear out the screen. To run the Splunk binary, type in /Splunk and type in start. Now we just need to continue to hit space, or you can just hold it until you see, do you agree with this license? Once you see that, just type in Y and hit enter. Enter an administrator username. I am going to type in MyDFIR. And for the password, just put in whatever you want. Once that is done, we should be able to access our Splunk interface. Heading back over to my web browser, which is acting as a virtual machine on my laptop. So this is going to be essentially my SOC Analyst laptop. What I can do now is type in 216.128.183.94 on port 8000. Now this IP address is my Splunk public IP address. This is going to be different than yours. Just make sure that you enter your public IP address for Splunk. And don't forget the port 8000. Hit enter, and it doesn't seem like it wants to load. Now that is because if you recall, on our firewall, we only enabled port 22 and RDP. We did not allow any connections towards port 8000 towards our Splunk server. So let's do that. Going back over to my Vultr, head over to settings, go into firewall, and let's click on manage. Click on the pencil icon to edit, and under my protocol, I am going to scroll up and select TCP. We want to enter in port 8000 because that is what Splunk's web interface is listening on. The source, I only want my IP address. And then click on the plus icon. Now, in theory, we should be able to access our web interface. Let's go ahead and refresh that page. Now, after adjusting our firewall on Vultr, it appears that we still can't connect. So what do? Let's head back over to our SSH session. And from here, I'm going to modify the firewall using UFW and I'm going to say allow port 8000. So now it says rule added. Let's go back over to our web browser, and look at that. Immediately it loaded. So you have to do two things here. You have to add in your IP address under the Vultr firewall, and you need to modify the host firewall to allow incoming traffic on port 8000. On this webpage, I am going to enter in the username that I created, which was MyDFIR. For the password, go ahead and enter in that password that you created. And this is Splunk. So a couple of things that we want to do first. Let's begin by clicking on our username, which is located at the top right corner. Click on Preferences, and let's change the time zone to GMT. This will make sure that all of the data that is being ingested is in GMT time zone. Hit Apply. Next, we want to install an application. To do that, I'll click on Apps, which is located on the left-hand side, and click on Find More Apps. The one that we're interested in here is called Windows, and this is the one, Splunk add-on for Microsoft Windows. It will really make our lives so much easier if we install this. And to do that, just click on Install and sign in with your Splunk username and password, the same account that you used to sign into Splunk to download it. Once it's finished installing, you should see a complete message. Click on Done. Now the final thing to do is head over to your settings. Or actually, there's two more things to do. Head over to your settings and go over to indexes. And we will create a new index, and this is going to be called MyDFIR AD. Go ahead and save out the index. And finally, the last thing to do is go back over to your settings, click on forwarding and receiving, and click on configure receiving. And then new receiving port. We want to listen in on port 9997, which is the default port. And now that I'm doing this, I'm just going to quickly hit save. We might need to modify our firewall to open up on incoming connections towards port 9997. But let's try not modifying it for now. Now that we have Splunk up and running, we'll begin installing the Splunk Universal Forwarder on both our Windows virtual machines. Let's start installing our Splunk Universal Forwarder onto our Windows target machine, which is called Cloud Instance because I didn't name it. And this has the IP address of 155 ending in .10. And I already have an RDP session that I created earlier. So what I need to do here is head over to Splunk, make sure you sign in, and then click on Products, go over to Free Trials and Downloads, scroll down, and under Universal Forwarder, you want to click on Get My Free Download. Now do make sure that you select the correct operating system and the architecture. We are currently using 64-bit with a Windows Server 2022. And let's click on download now. And here is the Splunk forwarder. So let's go ahead and copy this, go into my RDP session, and I'll paste this onto the desktop. I just realized that we're still logged in under the user J Smith. What that means is that since this user doesn't have administrator privileges, we'll just need to log in with our domain admin account, or at least use the credentials there to install our Splunk forwarder. Once that's finished copying over, go ahead and double click the Splunk forwarder. And let's check the box to accept the license agreements. I am going to keep this as an on-premise Splunk Enterprise instance. Click on Next. And let's create a username. Again, I'm just going to type in MyDFIR. Next. We do not have a deployment server, so click on Next. But we do have a receiving indexer. Now this, we are going to enter in our private IP for this Splunk server, which is 10.22.94, I believe. Take a look. No, it is .96.5. So 96.5. And the default port is 9997. Click on Next and Install. So from here, we're going to enter in our administrator account. And for the password, let's head over to our domain controller, copy the password, and let's paste that in here. So unfortunately, we cannot paste our password. So what that means is that we'll need to type it in manually. After a couple minutes, it should be completed. Go ahead and click on Finish. And we're almost finished with our test machine, but there is a couple more things that we need to do. The first is head over to our Splunk directory, which is under our C drive, program files, Splunk Universal Forwarder, go into the etc folder and system, and under local, we currently do not have a file called inputs.conf. So we need to create that, or we can copy it over from the default directory. So let me type in I And here is the inputs.conf file. Let's go and copy that. Head back over to our local directory and let's paste that in. It will say that you'll need to provide administrator permission to copy to this folder. Go ahead and continue. And we need to type this in again. Thankfully, it is not too long. Once we have our inputs.conf file under our local directory, we do need to edit it. And we must do this using a notepad with administrative privileges. And to do that, just right-click the notepad and select Run as Administrator. Now I do need to type in the password one more time. Once we have our notepad open, click on File, Open, and let's navigate over to our inputs.conf file. Etc system local, and we do not see anything because it is only looking for a .text file extension. So click on the dropdown, select all files, and select our inputs.conf. Click on open, and let's scroll all the way down. And we do want to add in the following. Type in a square bracket, win event log, colon, 2// security, and close the square bracket. So just in case, I zoomed in so you can see, win event log, colon, 2// security. And we will type in index equals MyDFIR-AD. This is the index that we created in Splunk. And then finally, disabled equals false. Now let's go ahead and save our notepad. Once that's saved, open up services. And I just realized I need to enter in the password one more time. Right-click services and run as administrator. Type in my username and the password. Now the reason why we are opening up our services, we do want to restart a service called Splunk Universal Forwarder, or actually Splunk Forwarder. So this right here. Let's double click this, head over to logon, and we'll use a local system account rather than the Splunk Forwarder. Click on apply, hit OK, and go ahead and restart it by either clicking on restart service here, or you can just right click it and restart like that. Now you might get a warning saying, hey, Windows could not stop the Splunk Forwarder service on local computer. That's okay. Click on OK and then right click and start. The service should now be running after a couple seconds. Now let's go to our SOC Analyst laptop and confirm on our Splunk web instance to see if there's any telemetry being sent from our test Windows machine. Heading over to Splunk, let's go and select apps. I am going to select search and reporting. Click on skip and skip tour. Now, obviously, you can take a look if you've never used Splunk before. For the query, I am going to type in index equals MyDFIR-AD. Again, this is the index that we just created. Go and hit search and we get 0 events. Maybe we just need to adjust our host firewall. Going back over to my SSH session, let's do the same thing. UFW allow 9997. We get the rule added. Going back over to my Splunk on my SOC Analyst laptop, refresh this, and there you go. Beautiful. We are now getting telemetry. Let's do the same thing that we just did on our domain controller. So right here, I am on my domain controller, and you can tell by the IP, it no longer ends in .10, it is .136. I'll right click and paste in my Splunk forwarder. All right, so I just finished setting up the Splunk forwarder on our domain controller. And just to recap the steps, I copied over the inputs.conf file from our default directory onto our local directory. From there, I opened up a notepad with administrator privileges. Well, since you're on a domain controller, you're already likely an admin. So you didn't really need to do that, but I did it anyways. And I went ahead and opened up the inputs.conf file. And I added in the new entry, which is the win event log security, pointing over to my index of MyDFIR-AD. After I saved this file, I went ahead and restarted the Splunk forwarder service. Now let's check Splunk to see if it is capturing any events from the domain controller. Let's click on the green magnifying glass here. And if you take a look under the selected fields, we do have 2 values for the field name of host. And if I click on that, we get MyDFIR-ADDC01, which is our domain controller. And we have the vulture guest, which is our test machine. You have successfully installed and configured Splunk. If you want to learn more about Splunk, do take a look at their documentation as they are quite robust and detailed. In the MyDFIR SOC Analyst course, you will learn how to build queries to look for suspicious activities, which is going to be a great experience. If you are interested in the course, I'll leave a link down below for you to learn more about it. Now that we've confirmed that Splunk is seeing telemetry from both our Windows endpoints, the next thing to do is to create an alert looking for successful authentications. To create our test alert, which is going to detect unauthorized successful logins via RDP, we will need to generate a bit of test data. Now, if you aren't aware, the event ID or the event code for a successful login within Windows environment is 4624 under the security event log. Now, if you had no idea what I'm talking about, let me just search up 4624. And I'll click on the Ultimate Windows Security. So this right here is the event ID of interest. An account was successfully logged on. And if we scroll down, we do have various logon types. For events related to RDP, aka remote desktop, it can generate the logon type of 7 and 10. So let's modify our query looking specifically for 4624 event ID, where the logon type is either 7 and or 10. And to do this, I'll just expand any event from the top. Where does my event ID live? So this right here is the event code. So I am going to be using that. Type in event code equal 4624. And here are the successful logins. So let's expand the first event from the top again. If we scroll down, we should get a logon type right here. So it is logon underscore type. Now I am going to put it in a parenthesis where logon underscore type equals 7 or logon underscore type equals 10. And we have 7 events. If I scroll down, we can see that the user of J Smith successfully logged on with a logon type of 7. Now, do we have any that are logon type 10s? Well, let's take a look here. Yeah, we have 4 that have logon type 10s. Perfect. So right here, we do see a logon type 10 towards our domain controller using the account name of administrator with my IP address. And the IP address field name is called source network address. And if we take a look at Splunk, does it parse it out? And yes, it does. It parses it out using the field name of source underscore network underscore address. For this particular alert, I am going to modify the query and remove logon underscore type equals 10. And I am going to say source underscore network underscore address equals asterisk. So that means that a value must exist under this field name. And we have 7 events. Now, if we take a look at the first event, notice that there is nothing under the source network address. So let's filter those out. Now, I know in a real world environment, you might not want to do that, but since this is just a demo, I am going to filter that out by saying source underscore network underscore address does not equal, and put it into quotes, a dash. Now we should have 6 events. And if we scroll down to our source network address, we should get only one value, which is the IP address from me. Now, let's just say that our work office has a public IP starting with, let's say, 40. And the reason why I'm doing this is because technically, any IPs originating outside of the office IP is considered quote unquote unauthorized. Now, of course, work from home, VPNs, or even vacation can cause some false positives. But for this demo, I am just going to say that authorized logins should be sourcing from an IP starting with 40. That means I'll need to do a source underscore network underscore address does not equal 40 dot asterisk. And this right here is going to exclude all of our authorized logins. Before we build our alert though, to have some fun, we need to loosen up our firewall rules. Let's go back over to our Vultr and I'll head over to network, firewall, and click on the pencil icon. Let's remove the RDP rule. Delete the firewall rule. Now let's add the same RDP firewall rule, but we are going to allow anybody from the internet to connect to our virtual machines. We can do this by making sure our source is selected as anywhere. Click on the plus, and there you go. technically anybody should be able to connect to my virtual machine. Now, to generate some telemetry or interesting telemetry for yourself, you could use, let's say, another computer or Kali Linux and connect it to a VPN, and then RDP into your virtual machine. That way you get a different IP address, and that is what I am going to do. Or you can change the password on one of your accounts to something weaker like password or even Spider-Man. That way anybody from the internet can hopefully authenticate using your username and password. And when that happens, the rule that we are going to create in Splunk should hopefully trigger. But because I don't want to wait for that, and instead I am going to just generate my own telemetry for testing, I am going to connect to a VPN on one of my other computers and RDP into my test machine. All right, so I just did that, and let's see if Splunk captured our event. There you go. We have one event, and it is coming from the IP address of 212.112.19.112. If you recall, our authorized IP addresses need to start with 40. So this is going to be considered unauthorized successful login. And remember what I said? RDP can generate a logon type of 7 and or 10. Perfect. So now we have this event that we can play around with. Now I do want to make this look a little bit prettier. So what I'll do here is put in a pipe, type in stats count by underscore time. Let's put in the computer name, the source underscore network underscore address. And we also want the username that was used to authenticate. And we can use the field name of user. Now, if you recall earlier, we installed an application called Splunk add-on for Microsoft Windows. If you do not install that app, you will not get this field name. So make sure that you do install that app. Scroll up, let's add in user and hit enter. Now this just looks a lot more cleaner. Now, you know what? Let's add in the logon type too. Logon underscore type. Beautiful. Now all we need to do is click on save as, alert, and for the title, type in MyDFIR unauthorized successful login. And we can even say -RDP. The permissions, I can just leave it as private. The alert type, scheduled. I do not want it to run every week. We can choose to run every hour, day, week, or month, or a cron schedule. Now, I'm not going to explain what a cron schedule is. I'll leave that up to you to Google it. For the time range, I am going to look for the past 60 minutes. And for the sake of testing, I am just going to put in 5 asterisks. So 1, space 2, space 3, 4, 5. This is essentially going to be running every minute because remember, I am just testing this. Expire 24 hours, that's okay. Greater than 0, that's fine. And now for the trigger actions, I am going to select add to triggered alerts. And let's just say our severity is, let's keep it as medium. And let's hit save. We get a warning, this scheduled search will not run after the Splunk Enterprise Trial License expires. That's okay. Let's go ahead and exit this out. And if we click on activity at the top right corner and click on trigger alerts, I'll open this up in a new tab. We do not get anything yet, but in theory, after 1 minute, we should get a triggered alert. So let's wait a bit. After waiting a minute, I went ahead and refreshed the screen, and now we see a MyDFIR unauthorized successful login RDP alert. We have covered a lot of material in this video, and I hope that you had a lot of fun following along. In the last and final part of the series, we will begin integrating Slack and Shuffle into our workflow and build out our mini responsive playbook. That is it for the video, and remember to stay curious and do things differently.